Hello everyone, welcome back. This is S.C. Coleman, author. In this video, we are going to talk about what many refer to as Project MK Ultra. There's of course a lot of mystification and absurd ideas around this topic, as with many, but MK Ultra, perhaps even more so than Mockingbird or Project Mockingbird, has been shrouded in mystery and obfuscatory explanations or lies from those who are behind it. Now, as usual, when somebody comes along with something that is true but denied, there is often a desire to hyper-focus on one particular aspect, especially if that thing that is being denied is so wide and expanded beyond such a singular aspect that it is undeniable. Of course, everything can be denied, but the denial of something that's undeniable obviously leads to the conclusion that that denial is done as a lie, essentially. So to start with, we need to define what MK Ultra actually is. It is the desire to build human weapons, and the MK stands for Mark. Some examples of this is the SMLE, Lee Enfield Mark 1 through 4. You also have the Mark II grenade, and you have the tanks and planes and helicopters and a whole bunch of different military tools and weapons, all bearing that designation MK. So that's what we're looking at with MK Ultra. Now, in order to identify what you are dealing with, you have to look past the obfuscatory elements, the sensationalism, the movies and TV shows, because what they want to portray is absurd, and it's done intentionally. They specifically absurdify particular aspects and choose to ignore others. So the primary elements we first need to identify are the drug applications. Every drug applied in the MK Ultra program will have some type of adverse psychological effects. Adverse might not be the correct word for it, but either way there will be some type of psychological effect involved with these particular drugs being used in the MK Ultra application. This is because the drug itself is the primary mechanism to cultivate the so-called Ultra. The second is that those that are marked Ultra will be held in an isolated environment for a curation period. What that means is that in order to properly develop their so-called weapon, they must have that individual isolated for a certain duration. That is because outside influences can cause cause problems for the development period. The last element I have here is the system for impressing upon the marked Ultra will be done through some type of suggestion media. What that means is that they need the ability to be able to impress upon the mark the Marked Ultra. Suggestions. And here we'll get into how exactly that works. But first, we need to look at what the primary uses of this MK Ultra program are. The first is distraction, and possibly the one that most are familiar with. Distraction means undermining or obstructing the activities of others by causing attention to be diverted toward the Marked Ultra or ultras. Operative word here is divert. You want to, in this context, divert people's attention away from one thing to something else. That's what all the fake news stuff is about. That's what all the so-called rallies and whatnot, nonsense, and BLM and Antifa, and a lot of these things that have been done and continue to be done are simple distractions. Their only purpose is to divert your attention away from something tangible, from something that's important, to something that's just nonsense, essentially. And they do that with ultras, because these ultras are whack jobs. They're controlled through certain subversive medium and applications, and they do whatever it takes to cause chaos, psychological disorder, and mental stress, emotional stress too, specifically to get your attention diverted away from whatever it is you're doing. The more important whatever it is you're doing, the louder they'll be, the more chaotic, the more obnoxious, hey, look at me over here, look at me, right? And that's what they're doing. That's what most people are familiar with. The second, perhaps less. That is compromise. This involves using the Marked Ultra to cause scenarios that will discredit the target or can otherwise sabotage. And a good word here for this would be implicate. The idea here is not simply to compromise an individual, like get them to do something wrong or whatever, but rather to implicate. This is the idea of guilt by association. That's what some people might call it. Now, the object here is to take an ultra, put them into a compromising situation, or attempt to get them into a compromising situation near the target, and then implicate the target in what that ultra is doing. And I will have some examples of how this works later on. The next and last, and perhaps not that many are familiar with this one, is imperil. This means that you cause the Marked Ultra to cultivate a dangerous environment which will lead to the elimination of the target. The operative word here is endanger. These are specific ways in which these weapons are used, one for distraction, one is to sabotage through implication, and the other one is, effectively speaking, to kill. That means that the individual, when they send an ultra out to kill somebody, and the way that this manifests in reality is honestly ludicrous and very specific, right? A good example would be you send out a lunatic who you've developed your ultra. They're in their mental state is distorted so much that they will cause gas leaks, fires, explosions, poison, and all of the stuff in their mind they're not doing. They are doing something else in their mind. They have been sent to kill the target, right? But their desire to kill the target comes from a psychologically distorted viewpoint. And so it's not like sending a trained assassin, right? Where they want to focus on you thinking these ultras are like some sort of like Jason Bourne or James Bond type of individual who's got all this training and they can go out there and just, kill like 10,000 bad guys or whatever. Nothing like that. It's basically the same idea as that TV show, A Thousand Ways to Die or something like that, where you had a couple of crack addicts who set the house on fire by flicking or somebody, if I remember the episode correctly, somebody spat a lit cigar underneath the couch, which set fire to the whole place, and everybody had their hands taped up over those 40, bottles of beer, and nobody could open the door or anything, so they all burned alive. Obviously, I don't believe that's true. That sounds completely ridiculous, but that's the idea. Essentially, you got some incompetent people, some guy falls asleep on the couch, he's got a lit cigarette right there, it sets the house on fire. That's the idea. That is the idea of sending an ultra to imperil or endanger the target, specifically desiring them to cause and continue to cause dangerous situations that will lead to that target's death. The primary study and development. Now we're going to get into exactly how ultras are made and why that curation period is so important. Lucid dreaming. Especially with Joe Rogan and many of these others, there has been a deep amount of focus on lucid dreaming. And the CIA, of course, has been involved in that for a long time. They say, of course, for extracting information. Yeah, right. Psychedelics. It's in the name. Psychedelics. They are looking for particular substances that lead to an imbalanced psychological state which can be controlled. And this is where we get into the idea of inducing awakened dream state. That means it's like when you've been awake for 48 hours and you start seeing phantoms and stuff like that. That's because you're in a waking dream state. What you are seeing in reality is all part of a dream, except that while you're awake, you can affect that reality, as with like sleepwalkers and things like that. Methods of impression is what follows that, is that they study lucid dreaming, they study the effect of psychedelics and other types of chemicals who have some type of psychological impact, and the induction of a waking dream state, and then put all that together, they study how to impress through that. Meaning, to impress is different than suggestion. Suggestion is like you have a bunch of symbols and all that stuff. Impression is more like the embedding of particular concepts, ideas, and control mechanisms. So you embed into somebody's dream state, into their mind, that you are some type of god who cannot be touched. And somebody who's psychotic and in a waking dream state will see you that way. And you've embedded that in their mind. You can also embed some type of blockage to where they can't see you and they're not allowed to say who you are or anything like that, or even acknowledge that you exist. To essentially keep that ultra from divulging your identity as a handler to somebody else. That is the idea of impressing and building impression into the ultra program. And there's, of course, a great deal of study with single action versus long-term drugs. And that is going to be an element with the MK Ultra program. All of those drugs, which are long-term, will be used in a more long-term capacity, such as with curation. These single-action drugs, though, might be used on a target who's not actually part of the MK Ultra program. They're not being built into a, quote, ultra weapon. They are instead being drugged for some other purpose. And those are the single action, very potent, very powerful, but they wear off quickly and all that stuff. The long-term ones require a more isolated environment and essentially force feeding of them in some capacity. Also, there's going to be the element of removing the counteracting action substances, and the majority of these are natural. They target, as much as possible, any substance, even if it's a drug, which will undermine the effects, the psychedelic effects and psychological effects of their MK Ultra drugs. That's because anything that could threaten their control threatens this program, and they want to remove and destroy it because it will undermine what they're trying to do. Susceptible individuals, groups, and indicators for a fully made ultra will determine what I mean by individuals versus groups and indicators is that you can have an individual outside of a particular group which shows the indicators that they can be impressed upon. Somebody who always hangs out with the wrong crowd, for instance, might be that hanging out with the wrong crowd, that term is an indicator for the ultra program. That means somebody in the background is looking at it and saying they would be a good individual to target for this program. A group, on the other hand, is a little different. But you can have a group of people who represent and present indicators as a group for being impressionable. One of the easiest examples would be a church group. Sit up, stand down, bow your head, walk over there, sing, sit down, stand up, do this, right? When you have a pastor who can literally conduct a group of people, there you go. You have indicator of impression. Impressing upon somebody doesn't mean that they are just simply monkey see what monkey do, go along with the crowd. It means that they can be manipulated into doing something by specific individuals of someone else. Not just anyone, right? The impressionable person for the ultra program, the individual, is not somebody who can be impressed upon by family members. Because how is a handler going to impress upon an individual who's only impressed by family members? That handler would obviously have to be a member of their family, right? So they tend to look for more the so-called black sheep of the family, the individual who rebels and wants to get away from the family, and they always go the same way. They always go out with druggies and stuff like that. And that's the first introduction into the MK Ultra program. It is, in all senses, a drug control program. Its main mechanism of control are drugs. First and foremost. But there's more to it than that. Well, to be honest, I think the primary mechanism of control in reality isn't drugs. That's for the development period. The primary mechanism of control are arbitrary rules and regulations. I mean, one way or another, the MK Ultra program cannot function without a myriad of signs, a myriad of prohibitions, things, kid, don't do this, don't do that, and the ability to get people to go along with the idea of forcing others to do something without thinking about it, right? Forcing people to take a drug in the military, for instance, which everybody knows they shouldn't be taking, but people go along with it anyway just because it's part of the rules and regulations. Forcing people to take drugs which are not for something under some pretext or phony excuse, and everybody else going along with it just because they're required to. And you see that so much everywhere. All these people simply doing because it's policy, public company policy, because it's on a sign somewhere, because somebody with a badge said so, right? That is the primary control mechanism of MK Ultra. They cannot induce a curation period without the ability to force individuals and groups into an extended period under their control. Isolated, by the way. Now, obviously, the last thing before we look at the individuals and susceptible individuals and groups, indicators and all that, the denigration of analysis and confusing through movies and television. Anybody who analyzes practically the elements of Operation MK Ultra or Project MK Ultra, or Mockingbird, are obviously going to be insulted, laughed at, and denigrated in any way that they can. And one of the primary ways they'll do that is by feeding all the ideas into their ultras, sending their ultras out who are complete whack jobs, and having those ultras repeating the phrases and words of analysts. And that way, they can associate the analysis, the objective, rational, logical, and accurate analysis of what's going on with absurdity and insanity. It is an old tactic, it's not new, and it is very well understood in the church. Speaking of the so-called universal church structure, which has been around for, allegedly anyway, for thousands of years. The idea of rumors, intrigue, making crap up, right? Talking crap, as the word comes out of the high school system. All of that stuff has been known to be done in church environments for a long time. Nowadays, we see it everywhere, which sort of, I think, is an indicator to where the origin of the hidden hand comes from. But, we all know the so-called Jesuits, the Vatican, and all that nonsense, the Universal Church. And that, in many contexts, is like this MK Ultra program. Everybody says it, everybody knows it. It's denied constantly. And then it's mystified into sensationalist garbage, and people tend to believe that version, and there's less focus on the practical, tangible aspects which can be fixed, which can be dealt with. Much more manageable when you know what you're dealing with and what it actually looks like in reality, rather than some cockamamie hocus pocus crap that they publish in movies and TV shows, and then of course use in school lessons and actually try and use for to shape people's perspective of reality. So some notes to understand here is that the curing periods depend on the mission requirements. Some are long while others are short, or a curing period may not be needed at all. Implication also includes having an ultras incorporate certain information to the speech patterns in order to associate true information with so-called crazy ideas. Same with movies and shows. I did just say that a little bit ago. Identification requires recognizing patterns of behavior, determining the curing period, and ascertaining the operational objective. The mental health system is built on creation and control, where ultras must be committed to a facility upon completion of purpose, where they can again be unleashed. It is not simply to create the problem to solve, but also control of an asset. These are, as their handlers look at them, weapons. They're essentially the same thing as you going into a gun store and buying a rifle, or a drill, or even a staple gun, right? They are made as marked weapons to be used as a weapon, as an object. They do not consider them to be individuals, human people, or have any type of willpower or anything like that. They are, simply speaking, according to the concept behind this, objects. Value of an ultra or ultra is in their use as an object, like any tool, or the idea behind prostitution being that value is how much use you can get out of the object over its lifetime. That's of course different to shelf life, which is how long you can store something. And this brings up an interesting question. How do you store an ultra, right? So the types of ultras I have here, there are 4, but there's probably more. Model A, sort of like the Model T, Ford Model T, right? This is Model A, and the A stands for Army. Mefloquine induces a waking nightmare state, which is then called PTSD. And the marked ultra is put into a PTSD program where they are developed through the curing period. Model C is convict. Held in the jail and prison system, so-called inmates are hooked on street drugs and others while being kept awake by lights and TV, which leads to the waking dream state during their curing period. Model S is student. Held in school, college, students enter curing at university dorms and frat houses. Primary drugs used are part of partying and are done through disability suggestion and anxiety programs. Waking dream state is induced through loud noises, lights, and tedious, mind-numbing homework. This is done on purpose. They have a program to develop ultras in the university system in which they assign homework and tests and other things arbitrarily with the specific purpose of inducing a waking dream state. They know what they're doing. They also have various mechanisms to drug students, either at parties or through some type of test anxiety program or anything like that. I saw it firsthand when I was at the Ohio State University. All these people are running around with some type of anxiety or disability or something like that, and they're all taking some type of drug. And then they take other drugs too, not just for partying and for anxiety, but also to stay awake during tests and things like that. That's to develop an ultra, right? It's interesting how the homework in a school becomes part of that ultra development program. Now we have the last is Model G, which is group. It involves the coordination or grouping of ultras from the same or different model types. So when we look at this idea of the ultra weapon, it's the intent behind it is to have an ultra weapon, right? But the individuals building it from their own lofty, arrogant positions think of the ultras only as tools. But in actuality, the practical analysis is that this is coming from the mind of cowards. Those who want something done, but they don't want to do the dirty work to get it done. They want others to get the dirty work to get it done. In the words of Richard Mitchell, who I believe is a pseudonym for actually a woman, those who control the academic system are as far away from the classroom as possible. And those that develop and control the MK Ultra program are as far away from the ultras as possible. It's the same idea. And of course the academics flourished from the church system, so-called church system. This isn't about faith or belief or any of that stuff. They always love to hide behind a little religious argument of, oh, you're targeting me because of my beliefs, right? So they could obfuscate, of course, from treason, crimes, murder, all the other stuff, child trafficking and harvesting, etc. But you have to get behind that and not have the rent-free voice, whiny little snot-nosed voice that they have, which is they're accurately depicted in the Lord of the Rings books, not the movies, by J.R.R. Tolkien. So when you're looking at this system, you understand it's coming from the mind of a coward. You want to find the handler for the ultra, but more importantly, you want to find the handler of the handler for the ultra. That is effectively someone you can target. That is an individual which you don't need to establish. Knowledgeable and willful state, the state of mind, knowing what they're doing. The ultra has no state of mind. They want you to be afraid of the ultra. They want you to act like the ultra is your enemy. Because to them, ultras, they have many of them, they're expendable and disposable. In fact, I think that they value their ultras a lot less than a Marine would value his rifle. Right? Rifle for a Marine is their life. They lose their rifle, they lose their life. right? So the ultras are less valued than even a gun or bullets or anything like that. In these people's minds, they're completely disposable and expendable, and they have teams of them, the whole legions of ultras. But the ones managing and manipulating the situation are targetable. And their subset handlers are too. In effect, these ultras are all psychotics. They're completely out of their mind. It's sort of like dealing with a drunk person. It's not that difficult. The individual behind them is the problem. And individuals behind them, they are the problem. They are cops, sheriffs, prison wardens, the jail system, the entire corporate structure, all the arbitrary regulations and rules and posters and signs and paperwork, all of that stuff. And the mental health system, the entire system, like I said, is designed to send out these ultras and then have only one mechanism of dealing with them so that they can get put back in the system and released somewhere else. And they'll constantly be able to use these. So essentially you have two choices in their minds. One, you can obey the so-called laws and law enforcement. Or if you decide to drive out the thugs, uniformed corporate thugs, out of your village, then you'll get flooded with drug addicts, homeless people, and teeming groups of ultras. That's what they are. When you have a whole flood of homeless or drug addicts or gang members and stuff like that, what they're doing is they're flooding your area with ultras. And they say you can have one or the other. Either you can have cops coming in and stealing all your stuff, robbing you out of your house, enforcing criminal treason, or you can be flooded with drug addicts and gang members and stuff like that. There's only one solution for this. Force presence. What I mean by that is we saw it in 2020. The only way to stop this is to have regular people rise up, take their guns, and impose a force presence. Whereas no cops, no uniformed thugs, no corporate jockeys, and no drug dealers, gang members, or addicts will come near them. That's the only way to deal with it. And that's essentially the end of the Fellowship of the Ring series, in which the hobbits of Hobbiton all rose up, kicked out the sheriffs and all the footpad robber delinquents that were being brought in and were imposing a load of arbitrary rules and regulations on the Hobbiton, and then anybody who resisted was taken off to the lockholes. That is the same thing. They're not going to kill you if they can turn you into an ultra. If they can't turn you into ultra, then they will want to kill you. Possibly. They will definitely want to kill you if not only can they not turn you into an ultra, but you are a full-fledged problem for them who is actively engaged to destroy their control and free humanity. If you're doing that, they will try to kill you. And they'll probably start with trying to send ultras to camp out on your lawn, start fires, try to create some type of dangerous situation. And every time they have an ultra doing that, they have the added benefit of imposing mental and emotional stress on their target. Because then their target is going to be jumping and constantly looking around to see who's trying to kill them, right? What's the dangerous situation they're going to be in today? And it's induced, of course. But it's unlikely that if you're a particularly difficult target that they're going to send someone trained, because even though they might fail with someone trained, at least with the ultras they're expendable. Of course, I expect there is a level of frustration and anger when the operation fails, especially considering how much they invest in actually building this system and building up these ultras. So, to summarize this, the ultras are developed whack jobs, and in order to know what you're dealing with and identify when the MK Ultra program is being used, you need to be able to identify those signs and understand what you're dealing with. So I'll give you some examples of how this works. I already talked about, a lot of elements that I've actually seen in my own life. But I'll give you an example of how you can identify an operative, a low-level operative of the MK Ultra program, who essentially is like a drug dealer, or somebody who would drug drinks at parties and stuff like that. Not necessarily somebody involved in the development or curation period, but rather somebody who goes out there and identifies individuals who show the signs and indications that they'll be perfect as an ultra. So there was a guy who was involved in an operation of implication, right? I was at work on a project at the Marine Corps where one of these guys, Marines, went to a party, and then he was woken up by base police in the driver's seat of his car with the car on, with a blood alcohol level that was close to death. I expect they didn't do any other testing at all for any other substances in his system. Of course, it's anybody's guess what substance would have been used. Either way, he was from my analysis of the situation, he was drugged at a party, possibly using some type of tranquilizer. Then he was taken to that car, put in the driver's seat, and the car turned on. Because somebody with that level of alcohol in their blood cannot, as in impossible, they cannot park a vehicle directly between two tractor-trailer semi-trucks. It is impossible. And that's how they found him. So I think that was an oversight by the morons that did this thing. But this event was designed to target the project that all of us were on, to cause problems, to sabotage it, and obviously create an excuse that the situation was being mishandled and that somebody, one of their people, had to go in and take it over. This is a common tactic used as part of the implication. And I don't think that there's much else that needs to be said as far as the motive to kill or distract. Thank you. Now, for the end of this video, there's a few things I wanted to talk about really quick. As always, the force presence requires individuals to be capable. And the treasonous enemy corporate employees and people who develop this stupid MK Ultra program, all this other nonsense, they know that. So obviously there's a lot of vindictive targeting of anything that has to do with weapons, gun ranges, and anything that has to do with training, any outdoors activity, anything at all, which will lead to people having self-determination, self-control, responsibility, anything like that. They want to eliminate, they want everybody to obey. Which of course means you still have to maintain your capabilities, you have to train, right? Martial arts, all that stuff. But it's a little bit different when it comes to weapons, because you can't just go to the ranges anymore. Nobody goes out to the ranges anymore. You get harassed, you get abused, mistreated with a bunch of arbitrary nonsense and idiots and a whole bunch of thugs that go out there that want to cause problems and everything like that, right? Ranges today are very tedious, stressful, and unsafe. And they're made so like that on purpose. So find a way to exercise in your home. And what I did was I went ahead and I bought, and I can go out running in public and whatnot with a backpack and everything, but if you want to be able to train and in peace, essentially, to work on techniques without having to constantly be in some type of active environment, then you buy toys. This right here I bought on Amazon. And as you can see, it's got a magazine, and I can train, draw from the chest rig, right? I can train all the elements that I need to be able to train to that I will actually be doing. See, I've got my chest rig, I got a pistol in there, I'll draw my pistol and shoot someone, right? And then here I put on my day pack, which will have all the essentials in it. And for my main weapon, from here I can train all sorts of things. I can train shooting positions. And here, this one right here, this is a single shot shotgun. You got a light up reticle here, and you pop it open, it ejects the shell. And within the shell are foam darts. And so from here I can train all the functions of the weapon, and I can also do sighting in practice and all the different sitting, standing, prone, kneeling, all that stuff, right? Shooting positions. All right, so here I can train prone right here. Yeah. And then I can move to sitting. Kneeling. And, of course, standing. And then I can transition to a pistol. And now see, that way you can train and work all the exercises you need to do right in your own home. No need to go to the range and deal with those morons that have taken over the administration of them. On the other hand, it is important to fire the real thing. But this is a way in which we can, in a peaceful environment, actually work on technique, movement, and you can get a good deal of exercise out of it as well. Thanks.